A.C.E.S Junkyard Podcast, repairing, refitting, and salvaging mechs since 3015.
Hello and welcome everybody to the Armored Combat Escalation Service Junkyard Podcast, episode 25, your number one Battletech and MechWarrior podcast, recording in our subterranean lair in the middle of Australia. I am your host, Brandon, also known as Cattra, Kell, and with me today is Tierkron. How's it going, Tier?
Pretty good, but I have to, question the fact of if we're located in Australia, how come our pings are still so terrible on the oceanic servers?
I don't know, we asked Australians about that as well. They seem to be having alright ping, but depending where you are in Australia, because I mean it is a big place. It is a continent after all. I've heard rumors that some people get low 90s, 80s, 70s. Usually what we would expect people in like North America to play in North America would get. But if you're on apparently another part of Australia, you can get all the way up to about 200 again. So
yeah, I've been hearing mixed reactions from a lot of the oceanic players that I know. Some are faring very well after the fix that went in. Others are still having some real issues, and considering that they're actually the ones on who should be utilizing the oceanic server as their primary server, and they're still having issues with it, that's not exactly comforting. But at least from what I've been able to see, the fixes that went in for the oceanic servers have ironed out most of the problems. There are still some there, but that's just those are teething issues. They're going to get ironed out as more people play on the server and they find out what's working, what's not, and they make minute changes. They talk to their whoever it is that's running the server and figure out what to do there. So it's going to take some time to get it up and running to where it's the fidelity of it is 100, as close to 100% as you can possibly get. So it's not an overnight fix, but it is much better than it was when they first announced the oceanic server event, and everyone seemed to be having serious issues, not just people who weren't in the oceanic area.
I know I've been having some alright games on the oceanic servers, but you know who loves the oceanic servers? Juju and his goddamn 7 ping. I hate him.
Yeah, I've seen that. The funny thing is though, couple last last Thursday I think it was. I took a group of. No, it wasn't that. It wasn't last Thursday. It was a little bit before that because we were still had the oceanic event going on. It hadn't restarted. It hadn't been suspended yet. I had a group of about 6 aces. We dropped onto a skirmish match on Caustic Valley. It was on the Oceanic server. Our entire Charlie Lance was compromised of guys from the Oceanic server, and you could tell because they were the only guys there that had a ping of less than 100. There was one guy over on the opposing team that was from the Oceanic area as well, because he was the only person on that team with a ping less than 100. Not even a minute into the match, all 5 of them dropped simultaneously. It was eerie, almost, how quickly these 5 names just popped up on the screen, and it was just so and so is left, has disconnected, so and so is disconnected, so and so is disconnected, so and so is disconnected, and it's like, wait, what just happened? We just lost an entire lance, and we're barely started, and they didn't get logged back in until probably almost a good 8 minutes into the match. And the fact that by the time they did get logged in, they weren't all dead, was probably the fact that they hadn't really moved out of their spawn area really yet. But it was a very wonky match. One of our guys was using a dual Gauss rifle, Direwolf, and he was not hitting anything because of the lag in the hit detection. He was swearing that he was getting registration, and yet he could see the sparks fly from the model, indicating it hit, but his crosshairs wouldn't flash, and the mech's paper dial would not show any damage. So there's there, I myself never got dropped from a match, but I did see a number of instances where people, were having, issues. There was some definite lag shielding from a number of players, a number of players dropping, a number of players having major hit, registration issues. But now it's right now it's kind of stabilized, I would say. There's still some issues, but for the most part, they're going to get slowly ironed out.
I have to agree. I think it's better. I think it'll be better in the long run. I think they're just ironing out a few things here now, or at least I hope that that's what it is. But let's jump into our first topic, which is some quick Battletech HBS talk. For people that didn't know, there was some minor information released with regards to there was a small audio interview with, and I'm probably going to butcher this name. I haven't lived in Nova Scotia or anywhere near Scotsman in a while. So Mike McCain, I believe. He is creative director at HBS, and he is co-directing Battletech, the game done by HBS, which is Jordan Wiseman's company and stuff like that. So what do we actually learn from this interview? I'm not going to go over much. I'm just going to go touch on the things that we learned. So, one, we know it's a single-player game, but multiplayer is going to be a stretch goal, and they would love to have some sort of PvP Solaris-type game mode. You're going to manage your mercenary outfit. You're going to upgrade your mech warriors and mechs, but it's going to be a turn-based. It's going to be a turn-based game, like I said. But you control only a lance of mech, so you're only going to control 4, from my understanding. I don't think there's been any word yet if you're going to be able to expand more than that, but for right now, we do have the solid number of a lance, which we all know is 4. The new engine is going to be, for the game, is going to be Unity 5, and they're not going to be reusing Shadowrun's engine at all, and it's going to be fully 3D. And we actually have a lockdown on the time frame as well, so it's going to be done in 3025. Post Third Succession War is going to be that slow boil point that leads up to the Fourth Succession War, and it's a time of, I'm going to use air quotes even though you guys can't see me at all, peace, but with a lot of stuff going on under the table and that sort of stuff by the houses of the sphere. So it's a perfect kind of time for a mercenary to secretly work for great houses, and so that they can deny plausibility of actions and stuff like that. That is all we learned in that small little interview. I'd suggest if you want to, maybe I missed something, I don't know, give that a check out. I think it's over on the Battletech subreddit somewhere. Whatever. But that is all we have learned. So what I can take away from that is, yeah, I'll probably still kickstart it. I hope that there is a couple of stretch goals, maybe to bump up that lance to 2 lances, or maybe even 3. Get some old Mech Commander vibe going to it. And I mean, multiplayer is a stretch goal. I've been going into this at the very beginning thinking that was going to be a stretch goal, because they said from the very beginning that this was going to be a single player only game. So I didn't have any expectations whatsoever about it having multiplayer. So if it's a stretch goal, I'm all right with that as well. I'll still probably throw in 50, 60, $100 into the game, depending what the stretch goals are. What about you, Tierkran? What's your thoughts on some of this stuff?
I'm cautiously optimistic. As we've noted in the past, this is an HBCS, HBS game with Weissman. So it's in good hands. This isn't, IGP and MechWarrior Tactics. Weissman and HBS have done pretty well with the Shadowrun games that they've kickstarted. They just actually released, I believe, a new one this week, Shadowrun Hong Kong, I believe it is. So these, it's not like this company has never done a game. They're, not new to this. They have, a number of titles under their belt. They have some experience. They've done the Kickstarter before, so that, people can look at their history and see that, they've delivered on most of their promises in the past. You know, that said, it's still a bit of a hesitation on my part. I have this whenever I see something come up on Kickstarter or early access and things like that. You know, how much time and or effort or money do I want to put into a product that I don't really have anything know anything about it other than a write up, a summary, maybe a screenshot or a piece of concept art here and there. It is a it is a risk, and for all of the successes that happen on Kickstarter or whatever you know online support tool website is used, there are millions of ones that fail, and well, I don't think that's likely in the case of this game. I think it'll, do pretty well. It'll, at least get made. We'll have to see where it goes from there. Like anything, it is, you're acting as an investor. You're acting as a publisher for this game in a sense by, helping kickstart it. And there's always a certain amount of risk in doing that. Um, so it's really up to the people who are interested in the game to do their, or a product, if it's not this, it's something else, to do their research, to, weigh and evaluate all of the details of it before they are willing to help support it. If you don't do that, then really the onus is on you. You should have known better in that sense. Um, that said, I think this is probably going to do pretty well. Um, they seem to have a decent concept with it. I like that they're going to the 3025 period, which is often referred to in the lore as the brushfire era. Basically, because it's just small border conflicts, little raids here and there, a planet changing hands every now and then, but no major offensive action, no you know no major front style war like a full succession war. Uh, so it allows for a lot of things to happen. I also like from a tech perspective in terms of the time and in the tech timeline and the lore timeline, the forced, pre-forced succession war and forced succession war era tech is, from a tabletop standpoint, having played that, is probably the most balanced the game, the BattleTech universe has to offer. Uh, Past the forced succession war, you get in, it is still somewhat balanced going into the War of 3039 and just prior to the clans. But once clans show up, that's when you get into a lot of issues with in terms of balance. Even Weissman himself has admitted in the past that the inclusion of the clans and the way clans were done in the tabletop, was poorly implemented. That in hindsight, if he could go back and redo it, he would change a number of things to, try to balance things out better. He said that at the time they wanted basically an enemy for players to play against that they would have a very difficult time beating. That it wouldn't be impossible, but it would be a incredible feat for them to overcome this enemy, and the clans filled that role. And unfortunately, we've seen that translate over into a number of the other Battletech franchises, and it's led to balance issues in almost every regard in those franchises. We see it here in MWO. There are major issues in terms of intersphere fighting clans, not just in CW, even in regular matches. It's not impossible, but it's still something of a slog, fighting between one side versus the other. Almost always the clans have a distinct advantage, and from a lore perspective, that's understandable. From a gameplay perspective, it is something of an annoyance. I believe even G-Man recently put something up on No Guts No Galaxy, making suggestions for how to rebalance the MWO to make it so that the clans and IS fight, would be, better set, so that it isn't a foregone conclusion almost every time it of the two sides meeting, that the clans would have a distinct advantage. So it's something that PGI and is going to have to address eventually. But I'm glad for the HBS proposal. They're taking it back quite a ways, so they don't even have to worry about this. Maybe they'll have to end up worrying about it eventually if they do expansion packs or DLC or another game after this one. But for this one, it's looking pretty solid in terms of that era of fighting.
Oh, absolutely. I think 3025 is what a lot of people were hoping that MWO would start in, and then from there move onwards. So I think
that goes back to that original trailer that came out with the Warhammer.
Absolutely.
I mean, it said
that trailer that got a cease and desist.
But actually, I still have a copy of that trailer.
Yeah, I do as well.
I think any fan of the game of Battletech has that trailer, squirreled away somewhere. But in the opening shots of it, I don't think it says 3025. I think it says 3015. So it's still in that brush fire era. But yeah, I think a lot of people were hoping for that for MWO. Unfortunately, we kind of pushed more towards the clans instead, in order to have the extra tech upgrades and the like. And it's kind of understandable if you're going to do a fully multiplayer game, no single player, that you'd kind of want more options for upgrading and for customizing and things like that to push the timeline, to do a later era of the timeline, because where those technologies are more prevalent. But it's of course led into the issue now of clans showing up and balance being there and questionable. But yeah, I'm waiting to see what Weissman has for us. Once this thing finally does go up on Kickstarter, I'm hoping when they do put it up, we have some type of trailer with it, some indication of what gameplay will look like. Not just concept art pieces.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's going to be the Kickstarter put up first, and those usually include a video, but it's more or less them talking about what they want to do. Sometimes there's some little peek into it, but usually there's not too much as far as like what you might be getting. It probably won't be until after the Kickstarter, so that we start seeing in-game stuff, more towards what the final product will be. But let's move on to MechWarrior Online. There's been a couple things on the Instagram / weekend updates, that sort of thing. I'll just touch on those real quick. We got a quick look at the Black Knight and Mauler as well as the crab for their models and stuff like that. And I must say, they are looking pretty good. I'm very excited myself for the crab of all mechs. It's the one I want the most out of that group. You can have your Black Knights, you can have your Maulers, but the crab's going to be forever. You guys don't even know. New meta. I'm calling it here right now.
We'll see.
We also had the Blood Loyalty Reward announcement. To basically sum it up, to put it somewhat nicely, it's pretty much nothing. It's a nice camo, and it's a nice little cockpit item of a fist.
But there's a badge. A badge comes with it.
The badge. Yes, that is also correct. There is also a badge. My bad. Yeah, it's I guess on par for some of the stuff we've been getting recently. I don't think any reward packages have had mechs included in them, have they?
Other than the extra 4 mechs that come out eventually, the extra variants. If like Resistance 1 didn't originally have the extra 4 with it, it was something that was added in later, and if you had already purchased the top tier, they grandfathered it in. But yeah, none of these have really had that mentioned as, oh, if you've bought all these packs, then yeah, you get these mechs free. um the loyalty mechs, the loyalty Atlas, the loyalty Crab, the loyalty Centurion were kind of thrown out there this just about this time last year. But they're those are kind of, I would say, exceptions to the rule. Really and truthfully, we haven't even really seen a lot of these kind of loyalty rewards. They have Phoenix didn't have them, Founders didn't have them, Invasion really didn't have them. Invasion 2 kind of got one if when you had it between Invasion 2 and Invasion, you got, if you had bought top tiers packs for both of those, you got the Mad Dog included as well. But it's not, it's, as you said, it's not exactly something to be oh wow, this is great, I'm gonna, if I haven't bought the Resistance 2 top tier pack by now, I'm gonna run out and get it right this moment. And if I'll upgrade my Resistance 1 pack from being just the lowest pack to the top pack, because I haven't played any of the other mechs. It is kind of lackluster. I would say I would have liked to have seen them do something like with this camo being released, not just for the Resistance mechs, included across the board. If, since this is a, an IS, these are both IS packs, have that be offered, and available now for all of the IS mechs that you own. That every IS mech, be it a Resistance mech or a Phoenix mech or a Founders mech, regardless, you would be able to apply that blood loyalty camo pattern to them, similar to how colors are shared across the board. I think that would have been something a little bit more rewarding to include, instead of just for the Resistance mechs. But it's right now, yeah, it's nothing really to get excited about.
It's just more like something that is there.
Yeah. Even the pattern itself, I mean, I don't know. Just the concept art they show of it on the Centurion, it doesn't do a whole lot for me. I probably, I'm gonna get it because I've already got the 2 packs, but I'm probably not going to utilize it all that much. Predominantly I utilize the faction camos for those mechs, but oh well.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'll probably end up using them on the other mechs because I mean it does look like a nice camo. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to downplay that, but yeah, just like, I guess. um, but I mean it's better than nothing. I'll take it over nothing. I will say that. Let's move on to our next topic. Let's see here. What do I got written down? Oh, something I'm inserting right now as a quick topic for us to talk about is the public, a public quote unquote tier system. Should we be able to see it in public? Should we not see it in public? If you should display what tier you're in,
Yeah, I
or
was going
whatever.
to talk about this when we got to it, the changes in the patch notes, because for those of you who aren't aware, the August 18th patch did away with the old ELO system. This has been replaced by what is called the PSR system, or pilot skill rating. The reason for this is the ELO system is designed predominantly around playing 1v1, where in MWO, as we all know, matches rarely are 1v1. It's, you can have the most phenomenal match of your life and still lose. You can do you could go out, kill 8, 9, 10 mechs and still lose because for some reason you got paired with a craptastic team, and it just happens. The PSR system that's replacing the old ELO system is supposed to address some of that. It will take into account not only your performance as a player, but also your team's performance. So, you know, and the what we don't know exactly how it gets calculated. We do know that there are more factors into it than the old ELO system, which was basically a win-loss ratio. The PSR counts, damage done. It counts, how many assists you have, how many kills you had, you know, what what you did, how much spotting you did. It counts into a lot more factors than the old system did. So it makes it a better rounded system and doesn't focus just on win loss and damage. So in that regard, it's a much welcome change. Uh, what has come up though is there is a poll up about whether or not your PSR should be publicly displayed. And what they've said is the PSR is puts you into a tier ranking system. There are 5 tiers, one being the best tier, 5 being the worst tier. The idea being that tier 1 players should never get matched up with tier 4 or tier 5 players. We're talking, someone like Jaeger 12 or Sean Lang should never get paired up to fight against someone who has just picked up the game for the first time, or someone who, really doesn't, play MWO a whole lot and, just isn't up there in terms of basic skills. The display of the pilot skill rating would be in this tier system. So you would have a little number next to your name, indicating what tier you're in. If you're a tier 1 player, you'd get like a little Roman numeral 1 or something next to your name. We don't know exactly, but the poll basically is asking the community, should the PSR, tier ranking be publicly displayed? And if so, should it be full disclosure that all players must display their tier ranking, regardless of what match they're in or who they are? Should there be an opt-in, opt-out? Players can choose to display, their ranking, and then there's also the option of no ranking should ever be shown. It should only be visible to the player him or herself in their own little piloting stats area. It should never be something that anyone else has access to. And so far from the voting, the opt-in, opt-out option is running the strongest. It's sitting right now at almost 2,500 votes. The full disclosure is sitting at just over 1,000, and the no option is sitting at just over 400. So it seems that most people want the option of having their PSR displayed, but if they feel like it, they can opt out of it or opt into it if they so choose.
Pretty much. I'm of the option. I'm of the opinion that probably the best option would be to just opt in. But the way I see it, everyone's going to make an argument for either side, no matter what the option is. So,
Yeah, just looking through some of the people, writing their opinions on this, in the forum area of this poll.
that's a bad idea.
Oh, yeah. But a lot of it boils down
How long
to,
until the cancer's terminal?
Yeah. A lot of it, seems to generate around, people being worried that someone will go into a match, look at the tier rating or lack thereof, and immediately disconnect from that match because they don't feel like they have a fighting chance to win.
Okay, so I have the pleasure of chatting to some of the PGI guys every now and then, and I know some of them, if not all of them, are big fans of 1, Dota 2, and 2, Counter-Strike Go. And both of those have a system where you see your rating, either your MMR for Dota 2, or what bracket or group you're in as far as your rank goes. Basically almost in the same sort of ranking system for Counter-Strike. But both of those only display at the end of the match, and I would assume they would probably be doing something similar with that, where you wouldn't see the person's ranking in MWO until the match is already over and done, and at that final ending screen is where it would show everyone's rank if you have it enabled or whatever. That would be, I'm not saying that's what it is before anyone points at this and be like, Cattra said. No, I'm saying hypothetically that's the way I would ideally see them doing it.
Yeah, because we've talked about this before. We kind of already have that issue when people log into a match and they see they're going up against a 12 man.
I'm put up against, like, I don't know, Lords, SJR, and 228.
Yeah, and when someone logs in and they're running a 2-man or a 4-man, and they're suddenly paired up against a full 12-man of a high a top tier comp team. Yeah, we've seen it in the past where people will just quit automatically. Or if they don't quit, they'll tank the match. They'll basically go, I can't win, why try? And it's a shitty attitude to have, but there's not much you can do to prevent that unless you start penalizing players for purposefully disconnecting, which part of me says you might need to do, and other games have done that, where if the system registers that you purposefully disconnected from a match early on, it penalizes you. It either drops, you either don't get any reward, or you get a very small percentage of the award that you would normally get. So I don't know, for a game like this, if that really is an option or not, or if it, or even if it was implemented, if it would prevent such attitudes.
Yeah, I don't think there's ever going to be a preventative action to keep people just from quitting out if they wanted to. I mean, worst case scenario, they just hold down the power button on their computer and then boom, they're out.
Yeah.
I know people that used to, like, I didn't know them, but I know like the community in games that I used to play before used to know teams and stuff like that would actually pull out their like Ethernet cables when they met other people they didn't like, because you used to get punished for disconnects, but you didn't get punished for your entire game crashing. So,
And so, someone's always going to find a way to game the system.
oh, absolutely.
It's just what it is.
It's just a matter of
and
time.
It's unfortunate.
So we had a question submitted by Scar, who's one of the leading members here in ACES. Since we got votes taking place for what basically do you or do you not want to see your ranking or stuff like that, he proposed this question: should players vote for the next release of things? He follows up by saying, devs are doing well and the game is going smooth pretty so far, more or less. And to quote him, I think there should be a vote on what players want to see in the game or added next to the game. This would be an excellent opportunity for PGI to see what players are see what players' expectations are and what they actually want to see in the game. I'd be all right with this. If anything, it might create a hierarchy of what they try to rush out. But maybe if they came to be like, okay, so since we finished the new maps or whatever, I guess they've been kind of doing this, this kind of pulling the community a little bit more. But I mean, we know that the new Forest Colony is out. We'll talk about that later, and that sort of thing. But they came to us asking what maps we wanted to see redone, and they redid them. And then if they come now and be like, okay, we finished redoing these maps, what do you want us to do now? And present it as like 5 options of things, like maybe touch up some of the other maps for invisible walls, or work on new, I don't know, cockpit items, or work on alternative, I don't know, an alternative like item system or a cosmetic system for mechs type of thing. I know that was talked about in the latest dev vlog. But I mean, if they presented this sort of stuff and be like, based on the votes, they can kind of pick the hierarchy in which people want stuff done. I'm all right with that. Yeah. I think that's actually a pretty good idea.
I'm a little torn on this. I think it would be good in your sense of, saying, of optional things that the devs could be concentrating on. This is what the community wants, first, second, and third for them to, for PGI to be working on. I don't think it's something that PGI should be using to determine, what their actual development cycle,
Oh yeah, no, I never meant it like that.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I kind of worry about is if you push it to there, of people in the community believing that's the power that they have in that option, that they should be dictating to PGI what PGI's development cycle should be and what the time frame should be and what and that's where you get into some very messy stuff. We've seen companies in the past that have done that, and it's turned into a horrible, horrible situation for them. So I don't think PGI would do that. I think if anything, they're probably going to continue doing what they are doing, of asking the community for feedback, asking them what they would like to see, if time permits, added in. But they're not going to shelve what their main issues just to work on these community options. So I think the status quo is going to pretty much stay where it is right now. It might loosen up a little bit, considering from the latest devlog we did see they got the serious cockpit item thing, which I thought was kind of silly at the time, and I still think is kind of silly for them to have done that. But I questioned it also a little bit in terms of we had this whole thing about mech scaling. We were supposed to have 3 polls. We did 2 polls. What happened to number 3? There was supposed to be something about once the first 2 maps were done, there was supposed to be another community outreach to determine what map gets done next, and we haven't seen that materialize. So
Yeah, I mean, it's only been a couple days since it's
So
only been 2 days since the map came out. So Tyrcon, geez, hold back, hold your pitchforks and your flames back. Holy
but
shit.
with that, for that latter one, it's
Yeah.
understandable. It's that you wouldn't put it out the same week that you released that
Oh,
the
absolutely.
second map. But considering the scaling issue and considering where we are with some of the community warfare promises that have been made and the lack of care taken in monitoring the community's feedback in that regard, it makes me wonder at times, how much attention is being paid, on issues that you really should have someone dedicated solely to, monitoring that. We've seen it with community warfare. The loyalty rewards, the loyalty points, and the CBIL rewards have not been adjusted in almost 5 months, almost 5, 6 months now. And it's kind of absurd that some of the factions still have as high of a loyalty point reward and CBIL reward, considering they are currently cleaning, house when it comes to community warfare. The clans, number of the clans that had their awards adjusted. If you've looked at the community warfare map, they pretty much are, taking names every day and night. There's, very little slowing them down. Any, the factions that should be getting, changes, done so people fight for them instead. There's been no movement there. So, I'm conflicted on this issue because part of me has seen PGI do really well in following the community feedback, and then part of me has seen PGI do very poorly in other areas where they should have been, paying stricter attention than what they apparently have been.
See what else we have on our document. Oh, yes. I guess our big in-depth talk kind of thing. It's going to be talking about the Steam or potential Steam release, because that's been brought up quite a bit. But go ahead there, Tier.
Well, I was saying, we could hold off until next week on that. We do have the dev vlog that came out this week.
That is true.
Talk about instead.
But
because the Steam release, I feel that could be an entire episode right there.
Yeah, that probably will be an entire episode.
So yeah, maybe
we'll hold off next week. Tune in next week. We'll talk about Steam release and potential things about that. But one of the things that also Scar brought up was, would we be interested kind of in a CW event, kind of like the Battle of Tukyard, a second one for kind of like before Steam release to kind of wrap that up?
My response to that is going to be, if there's going to be another major CW event, regardless of when it's done, it needs to be done after PGI goes back into CW and readjusts the CW, place, the rules
CW
for conquering
is
a planet.
It's a mess right now.
Yeah. I mean, as I said, the loyalty.
One of the things I want to bring up is that, yes, I might as well talk about this now, Tierkron. Sorry for cutting you off. But
Right.
A.C.E.S as a unit has decided to go clan in CW because, quite frankly, practically speaking, there is no incentive to play Intersphere anymore. You get low money, you get low rewards, you get low planets, you basically live the low life. It's just sluggingly hard matches that you got to play at 110% of your game against clan invaders the entire time, so it's stressful. You don't really play for fun like you used to in CW, especially when it was IS versus IS, and not just IS versus clans and clan versus clans at the moment. But even then, like I said, the rewards, since we switched to clan, we've been making, I think, anytime we've dropped CW, like 200 to 300,000, or at least myself personally, been finding 200 to 300,000 more C-bills in a match.
Yeah.
So
yeah, most people are averaging a total number of 500 to 600,000 per CW match. a number of people are averaging much higher, 800,000 to 900,000. A couple people are hitting that 1 million mark per CW match.
Gotta drop those
And
Euromex, man. I'm telling you, make
yeah,
money.
but I think one of the biggest problems with CW right now is just the distribution of players. There's as we said, there's no reason to play IS because there's no one over there. You
Yeah,
go,
no, there needs to be some sort of incentive in order to keep players on the inner sphere. Now, I've been working on and off this little like kind of article series on NGNG about like what I would change if I was able to change stuff, that sort of stuff. Kind of like what G-Man's been doing as well. I definitely suggest you give both those a read. But my second one, I've been trying to tackle like incidents for community warfare, and the thing is, it's hard. It's hard to come up with ideas, and I mean, okay, it's hard to come up with balanced ideas, which just isn't automatically going to just swamp players into one area. And I guess that's the like quote unquote like hardest thing to do. Like, so for example, I've gone to a couple people both in and out of ACES. I've gone over to Kong. I've talked to some of those guys, getting varied opinions, and like the number one suggestion that I've come up with right now, or actually there's kind of two that I'm playing around with. The first one's kind of having, the number one thing everyone wants to hear is to have planets generate resources, but I mean that does nothing because the inner sphere is not going to have any planets. So again, why would you stay inner sphere? So this is mainly focusing to keep players interested in the inner sphere side of things. One of the ones which would be somewhat interesting would be a bonus reward for taking back planets in the inner sphere from both factions and clans. So say you drop on a planet that originally started off as Steiner, and you are currently contracted to Steiner. For just dropping and winning that match, you get an extra, like, I don't know, 200,000 C-bills. Like, something like that, I think, would start bringing people maybe back to the inner sphere a little bit, because the money will be there, so the people will be there, because people play the game to alleviate grind.
well, I think even before that, one of the issues you need to address is just the makeup of the teams on either side. I feel really bad for the guys that are still playing on the IS side because they're almost predominantly either loyalty groups or they're pugs. And that's not a good recipe for being able to hold on to a planet and to go on the offensive to try to take planets back. Pug groups, I will, having talked to a number of other groups like you have, one of the common themes I'm finding is that having a pug match, a 12-man, an organized group going up against a pug group is almost always going to result in a win for the organized team. Pug teams are basically, it's almost an automatic win every single time. It's absurd that people are going in and they're just cleaning house against these thrown together teams. Rarely, I not only have seen but have been told numerous accounts, rarely does a pug team ever do well. And by well, we're not talking win the match. We're talking hold off, you know, the enemy till the last few minutes of the game where the organized team basically has to make a do or die play in order to win. It's almost never even into that close. Most organized teams, if they get to their final set of mechs, it's because they've basically been playing the game, farming that pug team, giving that pug team a chance to rack up some damage to get to make some money over this match instead of just slaughtering them. And it's bad that that's what community warfare kind of is, that you either are organized and winning or you are pugs and you're losing. And that is one of the reasons why clans are winning. They are just always on the offensive, and predominantly they are facing pug teams, and that's just not even it's not even tripping them up. They they walk over any opposing pug team. Occasionally, the IS guys, they'll run up against a clan pug team, and they kind of do the same. They run, they basically clean up against the pug teams in that sense. But it's predominantly from what I've been seeing and from what I've heard from others, the pug issue is predominantly weighted on the inner sphere side. Pugs are almost more often found playing for the inner sphere than they are for clans, and it is one of the reasons why inner sphere has been at such a disadvantage. They cannot defend their planets from the clans because for every win that their organized loyalty teams put in, they lose another 3 matches because of their pug, the pug players that are trying to, fight on that planet. So, and forget about going on the offensive. It just can't be done. The loyalty units, the ones I've talked to, they can't go on the offensive because they can't get the pug players to go on the offensive. And even when they, the few times where they start getting them, the pug players end up losing and they go back on the defensive and leaving the loyalty units, high and dry, trying to sustain an offensive. So I think one of the major issues that in CW that needs to be addressed is the pug issue, the makeup of teams, how matches are set up, not and then finally how planets how battles on planets are decided, because the system before the Battle of Tukid, where the inner sphere had a major fighting chance in facing the organized clan top tier teams, you could match them team for team and still pull out a win because you could put more players onto that planet. Now that doesn't work anymore. So it's it's into a major mess. And I don't know a good solution, but the way it is right now, if they were to call for another major CW event like a second battle on Tukid, people would show up, but they would do it as a hard grind. That as soon as they got their match scores done, as soon as they got the number of matches they needed, they'd probably stop and not bother picking it back up, unless it was a thing where it's a event over time. And if that's the case, they'll get their individual matches done, stop for however many days or hours they need to, and then jump on it at the last in the last like 4 or 5 hours to rack it up for their side. It's just a complete and utter mess. It needs serious work done onto it.
Yeah, CW is definitely one of the things that if it was brought up in a poll, like we mentioned earlier, I'd vote for it quite a bit. So yeah, CW, it's a mess. It's a big mess. It's been for a little bit, but more so now than ever.
I mean,
so let's talk about one of the things that came up in the latest devlog. That's cosmetics for mechs. Now, I'm surprised people didn't realize that this might have been a thing. I'm pretty sure Russ or Brian talked about this either, I think, almost 2 years ago now, and like of either in like one of the original town halls or in one of the very early original, like when they had text vlogs or blogs, I should say, about potential cosmetic system coming from X, so like changing out the Atlas's head or changing the shield on the Centurion, that sort of thing. I always thought that was a great idea, and I'm not sure why they never. Well, I can somewhat understand why they never went through with it, because I mean it would be a hard system to implement and that sort of thing. But yeah, I think I'd say go for it. I think that's a good idea.
See, I'm of the opposite opinion on this. I'd say I don't want to see this, just because I think it opens up too many issues that would they'd end up spending more time trying to fix those issues than trying to fix what really needs to be fixed in the game. You'd have
I'd say, yeah. Well, hold on.
like
I'm not saying like have it overwrite everything else well, but I mean cockpit items can only go so far, right? So opening up another venue in order that you can use for doing, I don't know, cosmetic stuff to your mech, I'd be alright with that. I mean, I'm not saying like, oh yeah, stop working on maps and all of a sudden implement this system. I'd say it'd be pretty low key, but it is something I would like to see.
but I don't know. I guess it really depends on how intricate the customization you get. Like the shield arm on the Centurion is, I think, a good example. Like just switching that shield around just like the general shape of it, you know I could see it both being an interesting thing but also a detrimental thing, where you make it too customizable and suddenly that shield arm is you know bigger than what it originally was, meaning that person's now going to lose that arm even faster, and then they're complaining like, I'm getting my arm shot off every match, and part of me is going to say, well, you changed it to that, you're an idiot, but then you're going to have the issue of PGI, trying to go back and fix that because so many people complained that, oh, I'm getting my head shot off in my Atlas because I'm using this head mod instead of these other ones, or I'm losing this arm or this, it just, part of me says, it's something that is just too easy for opening up a can of worms that doesn't need to be addressed right now, that the game as a whole has other things in it that need to be addressed well before this is. And to kind of go with what was said in the devlog, to do this, not only do you have to model that, but you also have to then do all the things, with the camouflages that exist. You've got to, redo all of those so that they interact with that change to the model. And that's a lot of work to do. PGI doesn't have the largest development team, so I'd hate to see people pulled away from other projects to work on something minuscule as that rather than fix real issues in the game. If this game was further along and didn't have the issues that it does have, I would be probably more on board with trying to do stuff like this. But as it stands, there are other areas of this game that should have more attention put onto them than something like this, which is a predominantly cosmetic issue.
Again, I'm not saying I disagree with you. I'm just saying that it's something I would like to see, though not priority.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be cool, but it's like the decal thing, putting your unit insignia on your map, which we've been promised since almost day one. Part of me at this point in time says, I don't even really care about seeing that anymore because you've got other issues that you need to work on. But another part of me says, you've been promising this since day one. I really want my unit logo, customizable. I can put it on my mech, either on the shoulder pauldron or on the torso, somewhere. It's balancing priorities, and part of me wants to say there are greater priorities right now than some of these other issues, while at the same time saying, yeah, I'd like to see this eventually.
I'll agree to that. I can agree to that pretty easily. Let's see here. I think that's actually everything aside from the Steam release talk that I got written down here.
Well,
do you got anything?
With the devlog, there was a little talk about the other maps. They did confirm that they want to go back through and redo all of the maps. It's not like it's going to get done by the end of the year. They're They didn't even say which map would be done next, but they did say that they would like to go back through and redo each of the maps to a certain degree for depending on the map. They did say Caustic Valley, which most people would think Caustic's decent the way it is. They kind of want to go back through and revamp that because they said it feels a little lackluster, that there's there should be more to it. Um, they said Alpine definitely needs to get revamped. It's just bland and boring, and you know, we've all kind of said, yeah, Alpine needs to have some work done onto it. Terra Therma, they
Alpine
said,
doesn't need work. Alpine needs like an entire redo.
yeah,
just throw it in the garbage and start over.
yeah.
Uh, okay,
Terra
that's a bit harsh. That's
Yeah.
a bit harsh.
Terra Therma, they said they would like to redo, but they put a caveat in on Terra Therma. They think the art direction and the elements on Terra Therma are well done, so they wouldn't really go back through and redo all of that like we have seen with River City and Forest Colony, but they would change certain geometric and geographical features on it instead to change it up and to rebalance the map, which I think is what a lot of people kind of want with that map. That they like the look of it, they like the feel of it. It's just the placement of things on that map is kind of poor. So it seems they've got an idea of what they want to do with each map, and we were also told there are other things that they want to do and eventually add in. They want to do a dynamic weather system, but they have to work out a number of other bugs where um, it was mentioned they want rolling thunderclouds that spike lightning and release rain, but they have to make it so that the wet texture works not only on the map but also on the terrain and the various models that are on the train. And also, and this was something I really liked, they want it so that the raindrops actually hit your cockpit and impact on your cockpit, so your cockpit would get washed over with water, similar to if you take a light mech into the water on some of the maps. If your cockpit is sitting low enough, like you're in a Jenner or a Locust, you see the water wash over your cockpit glass and stay there for a moment or two. It's something, yeah, that'd be great to see. And it's good to hear that they're planning on eventually introducing that, but they want to make sure that it's to a point that they're comfortable with introducing it. They also talked about introducing a rock slide and avalanche uh, thing, which I I thought that was kind of neat. And they
It's neat, but I don't know what the feature would be unless it's like a tactical thing, like if you shoot her or something like that and close off. Like the only thing I can think of would be like in Crimson Straits, that pass there. If you could shoot something and close that off and force someone somewhere else, type of thing.
Yeah. Well, they talked about how they kind of came on it by accident. They were setting up trees to shoot down, and they had made this little mound with like 50 trees, and they shot one of the trees at the top, and suddenly it fell over, and then the two beneath it fell over, and it just dominoed down the hill, expanding outward like a rock slide or an avalanche would. And they thought, that's really cool. If we could do it instead of with trees, do it with this instead. So let's not get rid of that. We're just going to have to try to work and see, where we can implement that. And they said, for Alpine, including an avalanche would be really cool. It wouldn't be, a major detriment. It'd only go up like as tall as like the legs on a Jenner, is what they were saying. So it's not going to be a major, you know, tactical, use. It's not going to slow down movement too much, but that's still pretty early on for them to be saying that. So it could evolve into something where, yeah, you shoot, a snow cap, and suddenly you might not close off a pass completely, but you fill it with, debris that slows mech travel down. So you try walking through it and suddenly your, mech is up to its knees or maybe its hip in snow and ice. And instead of, running at its top speed, its speed is suddenly cut in half or it's cut by a third or something like that. There are avenues that they can look into on this, and it seems that they are somewhat interested in that in doing so, but it's not something that they're going to be introducing tomorrow or next week. It's going to come up later on, probably much like the dynamic weather system. It's something to be to be implemented further on down the road once they've got other issues ironed out. And once they've got the more maps redone, it seems also.
Yeah, well, again, I like them even just to go back and do a pass on like a couple of the maps there and get rid of the invisible walls and stuff like that. That sometimes blocks fire, even though I'm able to see the enemy mech, and I do no damage. And I do a bunch of heat to myself, and then I cry.
Yep, they mentioned that they've learned a lot about hit detection on obstacles and the like from the release of this new forest colony. They, where they are at now with the way fallen trees, and roots and everything snag mechs is much better than what it was when they first introduced Verdian Bog. And so that's one of the things they definitely want to go back and eventually fix on Verdian Bog. They don't know at this point if they'll do that separately or if they'll wait to a point where they revamp that map completely. So it's something that we're going to have to wait and see on. But yeah, other than that,
What's your thoughts? I just noticed that I wrote this down here. Didn't talk about it. Let's talk about Forest Colony, since I got a redo. I've been
it's
I like it. I like it a lot.
It's absolutely gorgeous. It is. It feels.
I think there's a few things that need to be fixed on it, but they're just minor things, like if they can somehow fix like FPS drop and stuff like that. Nothing to actually do with what it looks like or plays, or anything like that. But FPS drop is one of the biggest things, because I know I even have a decent to alright computer, and sometimes on that map, none of the other maps I can stream. I can, if I'm not streaming, I can get solid 60s on it. But if I'm streaming, it drops down to sometimes 50 to 45 FPS.
Yeah, it's I've only had a handful of matches on it, which I'm kind of disappointed about. I would like to have had a few more, but it's absolutely beautiful. After I got home from work on Tuesday and got done patching. I spent about an hour just running around the testing grounds, on it, and it's just wonderful. They took the cave out, which I feel, I've heard some people complain about that, but I'm all for, them having removed that cave because no one really used the cave. Most people, it's like on Alpine. No one runs for Gamma on Conquest because it's a stupid thing to do. And so the cave on Forest Colony, for people to run into the cave, it was a stupid thing to do. Rarely did it work out. And so for them to get rid of that, in my opinion, that's a great thing. They've done a lot of other things on, some, deep ravines, pools of water that have, mists on them. They opened up behind the mine area with, this water feature that looks like it's just cut straight down through this canyon area. It's that it opens up into a grotto. There's just so many things to see on this new revamped forest colony. It's stunning. I mean, River City was nice, and I liked how all the things that they did, and I think it showcases what they can do now for an urban setting. But Forest Colony definitely showcases what they can do in a rural setting, in a more green setting, in where urban features like buildings are not a major factor. It's seeing those giant trees is phenomenal. I finally feel like my mech is actually daunted by something in the game. Uh, just so many things on that map are just gorgeous to look at. Um, the scale of that map is huge. It's like 4 to 5 times larger than the original map. And if you don't believe me, go to Smurfy's, go to the maps, go to Forest Colony, and you can see on that map system where the original map was. It basically, the original map extended kind of from grids H7, I7 over to I9, H9 with a little bit, a couple, spaces filling in here and there on the border, but you know, com- you know, on this new map, that's like only 6 to 7 grids worth of space. So this new version of the map is huge in comparison, and I've seen battles erupt in kind of the original area. I've seen battles erupt over on the complete new areas. So it's very dynamic. It's people are learning their way around it, figuring out what are the areas that they want to fight in,
What
what
are
are
good
the areas.
traveling paths, that
Yeah.
sort of thing. Yeah, I know. I
So
was lost my first time playing it. I was just like, man, I don't know what I'm doing. And all of a sudden, I
one
ran into enemy mechs. I'm like, oh shit.
one of our members complained that it feels too much of a brawly map, which I don't think is the case. I think that was the case in the fight that we got into that match. It turned into a brawl very quickly. Um, there are there are areas on the map that are conducive to long range dueling and to LRM bombardment. Then there are areas that are more conducive to fast strike skirmishing. Then there's areas that are more conducive to brawling. So it's a map that has a lot of potential on it. And if you know what you're doing and can coordinate with your team, you can do a lot of different things on this map and operate in very different ways and using different tactics and strategies. But it's something people are going to have to learn, and they're just going to have to get used to. It's not something you meet, you're going to get the first time you drop into this map. You're going to have to take the time to learn it and to play on it and get the experience. Awkward silence is awkward.
But yeah, no, Forest Colony. I think it's a great, great map and everything like that. A few things I'd probably change, like I said, FPS drop, that sort of thing. But I think they said they're already got a plan in the works to try to address that. I'm not too sure. But yeah, overall, really good map. Again, just like with the River City redo, it's looking really, really good. So hopefully the next one looks a lot better. I think now we're finally out of topics. I don't know, Tiercon, you going to come up with something else, and then
I
make
think that's
me
it.
counterpoint
Oh,
myself?
the only
Oh,
other little thing.
oh,
For
oh.
one of the first matches I had on Forest Colony, matched up with a couple MS guys. One of the MS guys, we got into where the big trees are, and we got next to one of the trees that has one of the ringed platforms on it. A couple, several meters off the ground, and he immediately goes, "Okay, where are the Ewoks? I want to shoot the Ewoks." And he, that got a chuckle out of everyone kind of on the team. It was, it does feel more like a forested area, and yeah, PGI wants to throw in little characters that they don't have to be Ewoks. They don't have to be. They may just kind of look like little fuzzy bears. We have no problem shooting them like we do like we shoot the statues on River City. But yeah, other than that, I think No, we're
All right,
good.
so next week, like I said, we'll talk about the Steam release, our worries and fears. Such a clickbait title, I know, but we'll see. We'll talk probably a little bit about that, because I know that's been a topic of discussion by a couple of people online that I know, especially I think there's been a couple threads started on Outreach about it. What people would like to see, like, before Steam release, that sort of stuff. So we'll talk about Steam release. Again, it's all hypothetical because we actually don't know when that is.
Yep.
So we'll talk about that next week. So I hope you enjoyed this week's podcast, everybody. Until next week, this has been Brandon, also known as Cattra, Kell, and with me was Kirkron. Until next time, Mech Warriors.